users, groups, administrative units. Let's start with the users. So what is a user? So a user account is a synced Active Directory domain services object or an Azure AD user object. So that means it can be in a local AD or in Azure AD. So all the users in that needs to authenticate in your organization will need a user account. So an Azure AD user account contains all the information needed to authenticate and authorize the user during the sign-on process and to build the user's access token. So you use users or a user account to authenticate and to authorize. So every user will need a user account in order to access your organization. So without a user account, they can't do nothing within your organization. So let's discuss in Azure AD, there are types of user accounts. So there are 3 types of user accounts. Let me just clear the screen to erase all that. Now the first type of user accounts that you can create within Azure AD are cloud identities. You have a directory synced identities, and we have a guest user account. Now, what are the difference between these 3 types of accounts? Cloud identities, these are user accounts that exist only in Azure AD. So that means it's been created within Azure AD and it doesn't exist anywhere else. Let's say you have a hybrid setup. You have a local AD and an Azure AD. If you create a cloud identity, it will only be available in the Azure AD, not in the local AD. Okay, so simple as that. So directory synced identities are the opposite of this one. So they are actually created in local AD and then synced to Azure AD. So if we have mentioned that earlier about AD Connect, so that's made possible by Azure AD Connect. In this case, both the account will exist in both local AD and Azure AD. The third type is the guest user. These are the user accounts that exist outside Azure. Well, it means outside Azure, that means outside your tenant, outside your organization. Let's say your domain is pilocero.com and there's you're doing business with other company with the domain test.com. So when you create a guest user account of someone in test.com in Pilocero, that test.com account will be considered as external user account or a guest user. Okay, so I'll be showing you how to create that later on. We will be demoing it in Azure Portal, but for now let's move to the groups. So let me clear the pens. Okay, Okay, so groups in Azure AD. So they are simply a container used to manage users and devices. So I think for the exam, it will be more focused on users because we won't be tackling devices for groups. Now, in Azure AD, a group is just a mere, container. So let's say this is a group 1, then it will contain all your users and devices or mixed. So this is what they are talking about within the difference of Azure AD and the on-premises AD. So this structure is really a flat structure, while in local AD, you have to create an organizational unit. So let's say that's the OU1, and then below it, you create a folder or another OU. So that's the structure of a local AD, which is different here in Azure AD. It's just a single, it's a single entity or a single object within Azure AD. It can also contain other group. So that would actually could become an administrative unit if you have an Azure resource within an Azure resource. So that's what an administrative unit is. So it could be a group containing a group, another group. Sorry with my handwriting, but yeah. So sorry if I jumped into administrative unit that early. So if there are different user types, there are also different group types. So groups, there are two different groups in Azure AD that you can create. So they are security group and a 365 group. So that's a M365 group. So security group, this would be, you would be most likely be using this for managing, users and devices. And M365 group is more on if you are containing users into a certain Microsoft 365 group. Let's say it could be a SharePoint group or a Teams. So this is more on application, M365 applications, Office 365. But for management, you will be more likely using a security group. I'll be showing that later on the demo as well. So more on the administrative units. So an administrative unit is an Azure AD resource that can be a container for other AD resource. So as we have mentioned earlier, and it can only contain users and groups. But I've seen recently in the portal, it can contain device already, but it's still in preview mode. So which means it's not reliable in that sense, or you won't be getting any support from Microsoft if you use this in production and you get issues. So that's new in the Azure portal. All right, now let's move into the demo. So on the demo, we will be creating users, putting them in a group, We will create a group as well. We will show you how to create these different type of groups. Actually, I forgot something. So when you create a group, let me just clear the whiteboard. So when you create a group, so let's say you create a group, you will have there are three methods of assigning user or devices into it. So they call it assigned. This is the most specific one. We call it a static group as well, because you just add the group manually. Add the members manually. And there's a dynamic user and dynamic devices. So these two type of group assignment, they rely on rules. So for example, let's say you create a group here, new users group. So you want in that new users group only the users that have started, or let's say with a office attribute of London. So if in AD you can set certain attributes for a user or a device. Now when you put in, let's say, when you have a user and the user is not equals to London, it won't be added to this group. If it's equals to London, it will be added to this group. We will show you more of that in the demo, so yeah, please stay tuned. Okay, so we are now here in our Azure AD Portal, or how you ever call it. So how did I get here is when you log into your Azure portal, you get the Azure AD service here. Just click on that and it will direct you to your Azure AD. I don't know, call it dashboard or portal. I call it portal. Now let's create a user. So I clicked on that user on the left hand side. You're gonna be directed to the user. I call it Blade. But there are other terms for this. Some call it user management window. Yeah, so as you noticed, I do have one user that is already on the list here. This is the account that I used when I created the Azure subscription. So when you create an Azure subscription, it gets you an Azure AD, and then the account that you use will automatically be the global admin, and Azure AD will create a user account for that. In this case, a Microsoft account. As you could see here, it's saying identity issuer is Microsoft account. Okay, now let's create a user. So I'm gonna just click on that new user. Here, your first choice is to either create a user within your organization or invite a user. So invite a user is the process of creating a guest user. What are the guest users? They are external user accounts. We'll get into that later on, but let's create a user first within our organization. Okay, so select that create user first option. In the identity options, the username, it may differ on every organization. Let's use I have my second name, Christian.Nusaro. So that's the format I'm using. It doesn't matter anyway, actually. So I'm just gonna copy that the name, this will be the display name for the user account, but you could actually put in first name and last name here, and it will actually pop over here like a combined values. Then you have to set the password. It could be auto-generated or create your own password. That's self-explanatory. But auto-generated, actually, they create a bit complicated passwords. So if you want to use that, that's a very good option. Now, in the groups and roles, from this point, you can already add that new user to an existing group in your Azure AD. But for now, we don't have a group, so we just leave it blank for now. Now in the settings, if you want to block sign in temporarily or just allow sign in. So set that to no, usage location. These are all optional information, so just gonna put United Kingdom there. Job title, same in local AD. These are the properties that are actually, some of them they find it not important, but we can use this later on when creating a dynamic user group. Okay, so I'm just gonna leave that empty for now and then click on create. There you go, your new user account created. So if you click into it, you're gonna see the identity, the name, user principal name, and object ID. Okay, so that's how you create a user. Let's move on to creating a group. So same thing from your Azure AD dashboard. You select the groups on the left side. It will open up the group management window. And on the top corner here, you have a new group button. Click on that. Now here, you have to select the group type. As we have discussed before, there are two types of group that you can use in Azure AD. Now, in this demo, we will select security group because let's say this will be a management group for help desk, for the help desk team. So let's put that. Let's say this is a help desk group. Help desk. We put London help desk group. You can enter a description. It won't matter anyway. Now, on the membership type, actually, I do have the subscription I have at the moment is a free Azure AD free. So you will need a premium license for this to get this working. But for now, let's create a group as it is. Okay. Now, the Azure Portal website, it's not really that quick. So it says it's already created, but it's not showing on the list. So just hit refresh, and that should now show up here. So two methods of adding a user here. You can either go into the group and under members, you just add member here. Let's find our new user account. Just add it there and select. So same thing, you may need to refresh a couple of times before it appears in the list. There you go. Or other method is going to the user account and you see the groups option here on the left. So if you have any other group, you can just add membership to that group from the user account window, as you could see here. Okay. Now administrative units. So from the Azure AD Portal, go into the administrative units, click on add, name it. Let's say this is a help desk unit, and then next. So I'm going to assign a role here. I'm going to select the help desk administrator and select the user, add, and then create. So once I click that create button, the help desk administrator role will be assigned to that new user that we have created earlier. So just create that. It actually failed to assign administrators to administrative unit. That's fine. But if you have, check here, select that. Yeah, it's actually a member. I'm not sure if that's a bug, but it's actually doing it in the background. So that's the administrative units. Okay, so that's with the users, groups, and administrative units. Feel free to play with it within your Azure AD environment in your laboratory. Just make sure to delete it afterwards. After you created it, so you maintain a clean lab environment. With regards to dynamic groups, I'm gonna be creating a separate video about it. I'm gonna need to activate my pay-as-you-go license for that to work. Okay, so thank you. See you on the next one.